Hi, Mama.
Hi, Lizzie. How are you?
I'm good. Today's yoga question is you have been practicing yoga for 45 years. That's a really long time. So, how do you keep it fresh?
Well, the way, of course, I go through periods of time when I'm not as interested as other times, but generally, I'm basically a curious person. And because how my yoga has evolved, I have brought the curiosity off the mat. I brought the curiosity from not just what does my leg do in Trikonasana, but what does my breath do when I'm upset? What does my mind do all day long? And so one of my great joys is 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 becoming aware that yoga is very big and that less and less do I see a difference between what I'm doing in my so-called normal life. And life is not normal, it's a miracle. But what I'm doing in my so-called regular life, in my, washing the car, folding the laundry kind of things, really is an asana. I started getting this many decades ago, and it just keeps growing. And a perfect example for me is I was invited to a small gathering with a Rinpoche uh, Buddhist teacher a couple weeks ago, and we were sitting some on chairs and some on the floor in lotus, and I was sitting on the floor about fairly close to him, and he was talking about things that I've heard so many times. But he was doing it, his English was quite good, and he was doing it in a very simple way, but he resonated with the words. He was in what I call being in integrity, that who he was and what he said were not separate.
Hmm.
So he was talking about meditation, and he said, this is what you do. You don't go to the past. You don't go to the future, which cuts out 98% of everything.
I'm mostly thinking about all day long what's for dinner.
What's next is apparently my favorite mantra because I say it all day long.
Yeah.
He said, don't go to the past. Don't go to the future. Stay in the present. Now, that's not a revolutionary thing. I mean, how many times have we said that, taught that, written that, heard that?
Hmm.
He said that. But then the next thing he said, he paused and he said, then leave your mind alone. And I burst out laughing. Usually, like when I'm in a solemn spiritual group, I'm a little more contained with my reactions.
Hmm.
But it was unbidden, childlike. I just burst out laughing because it meant it's exactly what I do. I poke at my mind all the time. I argue with it. I push on it. I flirt with it. I cajole it. I get mad at it. I do everything but leave my mind alone. So I started laughing, and he looked at me and he started laughing, and we both threw back our heads and we just laughed. And then everybody else was laughing. And it sounds so simple, but it was such a blessing for me that such a simple phrase, leave your mind alone, was a learning that I got on a different level than I've ever gotten it. And so that's my new mantra. And that was just going to hear someone speak. It wasn't standing on my head, lotus pose. It was not performing. It was not doing. It was receiving that which is already in me anyway. It was experiencing that which I already know in a completely fresh way. And that to me is the key to practice. And so I use that phrase now every day, leave your mind alone. And I find the most fascinating thing is I can still do my work, quote unquote. I can still do my pose. I can still cook my favorite new soup uh, with grated fresh turmeric in it. Ah, so good. But I don't have to, and I can leave my mind alone while I do it.
Yeah, so I like this a lot, but can you say more specifically an example? So you're cooking soup and then your mind starts to spin. And how does that process then really, what does it feel like to leave it alone?
So I'm cooking the soup, but I'm not really cooking the soup because I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do next? Can I get the soup started to cook so I can run do this? Can I do that? What do I need to do for my trip tomorrow? And then I realize that I'm arguing with. That's a really simple way that I'm planning. I'm planning, and planning is a great thing. Always planning. My favorite quote on planning is, "It's absolutely necessary and completely impossible."
Mm-hmm.
So planning is a way that I avoid being present.
Yeah.
And I notice it. I just say, "Oh, leave your mind alone. Cook the soup." It doesn't mean I'm not thinking, but I notice what that phrase helps me do. And many times a day I remember it. Is it helps me say, "Oh yeah, there I go again. I'm spinning somewhere else." So it doesn't really matter what I'm doing. I can be on my yoga mat, and trust me, I have done this more times than I could possibly count. I'm doing the poses in a rote way. I'm not practicing yoga.
Yeah.
And so whenever I can, see, I like to say being aware is not hard, remembering to be aware is hard.
Yeah.
So this was, for me, that phrase is a phrase. I write it down whenever I can. I put it in a yellow stick note on top of my computer, so I see it first thing in the morning when I go in there. I, you know, it's a quote unquote yellow stick tab, a reminder to me, leave your mind alone. Just leave it alone. And it's an undoing, which is so much harder than a doing. So I could tell you, turn your left foot out, now turn your right foot in, now stretch from here, lift that, breathe this way, sit in this lotus pose. I can teach you what to do. But as you go along your yoga practice, it's no longer about doing. It's about undoing. Stepping back from taking the path you've taken a gazillion times and choosing another way. It's about vairagyam, letting go, from the First Sutra, Yoga Sutra. Letting go means kindly, softly, compassionately choosing another path, saying no gently, with the most refined awareness to your pattern.
Thank you so much, Mama. That was really helpful.
You are extraordinarily welcome, my daughter. You are my favorite daughter. You know that.
So, darling listener, if you liked this conversation, there's a lot more to be found in a digital course that we're releasing on the 1st of October. It's available for pre-sale. And if you'd like to find out more, please visit judithhansenlassiter.com and click on online learning. Thanks so much. Namaste, Mama.
Namaste. May we live like the lotus at home in that muddy water.